All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Beyond the Physics podcast. This is your host, Joseph Guzman. So today we're going to be interviewing Gabriel Rodriguez. So Gabe is a physics graduate student who is currently studying hadronic physics. And Gabe was born in Puerto Rico, having moved to the U.S. for this physics grad school program. So as such, most of the talking points that we touch upon today have to do with cultural differences between Puerto Rico and the United States. For instance, we talk about Gabe's experience in the education system growing up, and I was quite surprised to hear the differences between our K through 12 programs. And we also talk about whether Puerto Rico should become a U.S. state, and we happen to have recorded this before a lot of the controversy dealing with Puerto Rico's governor, which inspired hundreds of thousands to protest. So unfortunately, we miss some of those talking points. And we also talk about Gabe's undergrad college experience, which is quite interesting because Gabe started off as an accountant, only to later discover that he wanted to become a physicist. So stick around if you want to hear how that transition occurred. And then the more broad general topics, we talked briefly about imposter syndrome, how Gabe got into hadronic physics specifically, and we repeat the question from Sahana's podcast of, if an alien walked through the front door, what would you ask it? And this led us down some rabbit holes of things that interested us. So I think that should briefly summarize the conversation tonight. So stick around if any of that sounds interesting to you. And it's been quite interesting the past couple weeks. I've been receiving a lot of comments from friends and family and people I wouldn't really expect to have checked out the podcast and have been really enjoying it and have told me how it's been inspiring, interesting conversations. And that's really, I guess, the goal of the podcast, right? So keep those stories coming. I mean, it always feels great and just keeps me inspired to keep on going, right? So thank you for that. And I guess I'd just like to apply a little pressure here is if those people, you know who you are, or any of you listening now, haven't already liked, commented, subscribed to the podcast, whatever platform you're listening to it on, please do so. I mean, I am very eager to hear what you guys think of the podcast thus far. I mean, it's been a little radio silent out there, despite the odd comment here or there. Anyways, I'll try to be patient, but please like, comment, subscribe. I would be forever grateful. Anyways, without further ado, I bring to you our conversation with our good friend, Gabe. This is Beyond the Physics. Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the Beyond the Physics podcast. This is your host, Joseph Guzman, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Irene Roman.
Hi everyone, this is Irene. Hope you're having a great day.
And today our very special guest is Gabriel Rodriguez.
Hi everybody.
I'm glad that you could join us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Right. And so I guess where I wanted to start today's conversation is perhaps starting a little bit with like your upbringing, right? And so maybe you can give us a little more detail as to what it was like growing up. So were you born in Puerto Rico? Is that the case?
Right. I was born, raised until I was 24, 25, and I moved to start my graduate studies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then do you think you could give us a little more detail as to like what it was like growing up in Puerto Rico? Like now that you've had some years in the U.S., have you noticed anything interesting in terms of like cultural differences or like anything that in particular you felt impacted you growing up?
I mean, nothing major, I wouldn't say. But I mean, mostly I'm in the physics department studying. So I was like, maybe I should try to get more cultural experience with the United States. But for the most part, no, I thought I had a good childhood. I never had any problems with my parents. School was boring to me for the most part, and by the most part, I mean all the parts. Yeah.
Okay, well, so then could you tell us perhaps like any details about your childhood and stuff like that? Like, did you have a lot of siblings? What was your, I don't know, environment like, your community, anything like that?
Sure. So I lived with my mom and dad and my two brothers. So my brother and my sister. I'm the youngest of the three. My sister is 6 years older than me, and my brother is 2 years older than me. We lived in the house that's on top of my grandmother's until I was about 5 or 6, because my grandfather was sick, so we moved to his house to take care of him. About a year later, he passed away. I was around 6. It was, I mean, aside from that, my childhood though was it was nice. My parents also, I mean, divorced when I was about 7 or 8. I went to two schools. I went to a small school that was a house before it was a school. It was a school until up to third grade. Very like close, small classrooms, maybe 20 people at most, probably 15. Like the principal was always around, and it was the kind of principal that whenever you had lunch, you were forced to eat your plate, or you would she would sit down next to you and make you wait for like another 10 minutes until you finish your plate. So, it was that kind of environment. Afterwards, I went to my second school, where I stayed until high school. That was both these houses were walking distance from my house, from my second house where my grandfather lived. One of them was about 10 minutes, the other one was about 15 minutes. So I was always close to home. My community, when I was younger, the neighborhood was a little more lively. I want to say like around I was 12. It kind of died down, so I didn't have many friends around my neighborhood. Yeah, like I said, school for the most part was boring. I was never very interested in what they were teaching. My family, they're all business people. My dad was a mechanic. He owned a business for some time where he sold motorcycles. My mom studied accounting. My sister studied, what is it called in English? Marketing. My brother did administrative studies. So I'm the only one in my home that had to take more than calculus.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a pretty interesting upbringing in the sense that it seems very different than my own already. Right. So like when I went to school, there was like even in elementary school, there was hundreds of kids. Right. So if you were to speculate, how do you think having such a close knit or like such a small classroom, is it just like your neighborhood friends, I guess, then that basically more or less attended your?
Yeah. So some of them were neighborhood friends. Some of them were from farther away, but that school kind of went out of their way to try to incentivize the parents to be more attentive to their children, and to have to make friends with the other parents. For example, my sister also studied in that school, and this is a bit of an outlier, but so my mom became very close friends with another parents from there. That group became very close of parents, and I've been going to one of those parents' Christmas parties till I was about 22.
Wow.
Every year, and to maybe sometimes if there was a big boxing fight. Boxing's a big thing in Puerto Rico. There was a big boxing fight. Sometimes he would do a party. We would invite us, stuff like this. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. I mean, and then you also mentioned that the community kind of died down around 12 years old.
Yeah.
So why was that the case?
I think that was mostly just coincidence. A lot of people moved out. And for example, I had about 5 or 6 close friends around my neighborhood, me and my brother. But so me and my brother went to one school, the other 2 of them went to another school. One of them moved that way. The third one originally was in our school and then also moved away about a year after I came in to that school. So I think it was mostly a coincidence that they moved all away.
Okay, so like moved away to United States or somewhere else?
No, I think none of them moved away. No, none of them moved away from the United States. So.
And so how is it that they ended up at a different school to begin with?
So there were 2 bigger schools that were nearby. So in fact, my sister went to, what was it called? Not Santa Fe. To one school where the other 2 kids went. And me and my brother went to La Merced, which is the school I went to, which was, these 2 schools were both about 15-minute, 20-minute walk. So I think it was just a coincidence that we diverged in that sense.
Right. So it's just like, it sounds like there's a choice or something in where you get to go to school.
These are 2 private schools.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know how exactly things are here, but in Puerto Rico, private school doesn't seem as expensive as what I can gather.
Yeah.
It can be expensive, sure, but not as, like, my family wasn't that well off, and they could afford a decent private school.
Yeah. Yeah. So, to tell you my perspective, as at least to how I think it works in the United States, is that if you want to go to public school, it's determined based upon where you live. Yeah. Right. And so, like when I was growing up, I was basically on this locked path of like, here's where I'm going to go to school if I end up going to public school. I did go to private school for some years in middle school. My parents were not well off either, so they took out a mortgage on their house and went into debt for that opportunity. And it was very expensive from what they tell me. Basically more expensive than college, right? So it was a pretty big burden, and not many families would do the same. But yeah, so this is why, like, if you have a certain, if you have certain communities that are kind of disadvantaged in terms of the opportunities available to them, like certain teachers, might specifically choose to go to better known schools with better reputations and stuff like that. It could kind of have a rippling effect in terms of, like, you're born in this area, so you have a worse education growing up. Right. And so if you want to escape that, you either have to kind of like cheat the system a little bit and say, oh, I don't live here. I actually live in some relative's place or something, and end up driving, much longer distance to go to this better known school and stuff like that. So these opportunities of choosing different schools is actually kind of like a big barrier for a lot of families in the United States.
Okay. So I don't know much about the public school, but I'm pretty sure it's not that way in Puerto Rico, because I know people from that did want to go to public school that went to public schools that were far from their homes. And I know there's a few specific ones that are specialized either in science or arts and stuff like that. And those take students from all over the place, from all over the island.
Yeah.
So of course we have schools with really bad reputation, so parents that care about their kids usually try to avoid those. But in my case, my mom also mostly mortgaged when my parents separated. Yeah. And partly was due because, they did fight, but there was a big hurricane around 1999 or 98. And so the shop where my father used to sell motorcycles got flooded. And so, recently before that, it had been robbed. So they had to close it. And so things economically got worse and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, my mom also mostly mortgaged it, partly because she insisted that private school is much better than public school. Therefore, I need to do this to get my kids into private school and get a better education.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Irene, what was your experience growing up in terms of like pre-high school, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone to public school basically all my life. When I was young, I went to a private school for kindergarten and first grade, and then we moved to my parents specifically. At first, I guess we lived in a town that's public school was notoriously known not to be too great. I guess it was notorious. And so they put my sister and I in a private school. It was a Catholic school for 2 years around there. I guess the whole kind of culture in Catholic schools, a kind of, I would say, I don't know how you can
They're a bit more
explain that.
strict.
Yeah.
Like my school was Catholic.
More strict.
Light Catholic.
It was light Catholic.
I would call it light Catholic.
So you have experience in a somewhat Catholic school culture.
Yeah. I mean, it's not super strict, because I know like my parents went to more strict, and they like hit you with the ruler like that severe.
Yeah, I mean, I
Mine
definitely
was-
wanted to ask you too more about the culture, the educational culture, I guess, in the schools that you had gone to, like how the school system was set up, the classes set up. Was it more freedom for the students? Was it very structured? Was it strict?
So, in my case, in both schools, you were in the same classroom always. So the professor's the one that rotated around, and usually it was you sit down, you spend. I think it was three classes in a row. Then you have lunch, and then 4 classes in a row, and then you leave. And then you just rotate what class you take. I don't know how it is here, but almost every day, you would take all your classes. Like you would take Spanish, English, math, history, whatever the other ones were. Usually there were 7. You took those classes. Oh, yeah, science. You take all 7, either all 5 days or at least 4 days in my schools. And you were always in the same room. And if you left, it was usually, if you left the classroom, it was usually because the teacher was maybe inspired or wanted to do something special that day. And so we went out for a little bit. But
I see.
yeah, and every once in a while we would have field trips. But those varied from year to year.
So I guess why did you find it not interesting for you?
I mean, I am a fairly docile person. I don't complain when people... I usually don't complain that much. But if I don't like something, it's very hard for me to care for it. And for the most part, I was just sitting there obeying what they told me. Like, okay, I'll play along. I don't like what you're doing. But okay.
I guess, like, why was school boring to you?
I mean, it was just sitting down, listening to someone tell you about all these subjects which you don't really have I didn't have any particular personal interest in, because I had no attachment to them. There were the topics, as far as I was concerned, there were topics picked by someone else, hopefully with good intentions, hopefully with smart intentions as well. But they were just picked by someone else, and I was just being obedient more than anything else, I think.
So it was like a kind of like traditional classroom experience where it's like you sit down at the desk, the teacher's teaching a specific topic in some particular way, and you have to learn those kind of rules to apply it. And okay. So I was wondering if there was kind of a different, in some way, experience in terms of the traditional classroom. Like maybe there was like more freedom in what you could study, like it was more like project based at some point, or if you really had like a traditional educational experience.
No, I mean, my understanding is that at some point, Puerto Rico basically adopted the U.S. system for the most part.
Okay.
So as far as I know, it's mostly the same. In fact, sometimes I've seen schools where the students were choosing their classes. And I was like, you could choose your classes? Because I think the only chance I got to pick a class out of my entire schedule was in, I think, 12th grade. And it was essentially 2 choices out of 4. You could pick 2 out of 4 choices.
Oh, wow.
So that was the extent.
In 12th grade?
In 12th grade, yeah. Maybe
Wow.
11th. I don't think 11th, but maybe. I'm going to say maybe.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Because, I mean, my whole high school career, you get to pick your whole schedule. Like, it was very similar to a college experience in that sense. And that if you wanted to, like, focus on more science stuff, you kind of were given that opportunity, like you could focus on taking this more math track, but it's up to you to decide that and to come up with that plan yourself, kind of thing. So like, for instance, out of high school, I already finished, Calc 1 and statistics and, all these college math courses, because at some point I decided I wanted to do physics in high school. So that kind of gave me a leg up in terms of when I went into college. I could finish, a little earlier than I would have otherwise and stuff like that. So I think that's interesting. I mean, if you were to speculate as to why do you think that is that just because of the amount of people on the island, or like specialty, or like...
No, I don't think it'd be because of the amount of people. I mean, I know that the really good schools, some of the really good schools private and the really good schools that are public, they both did that. Because I knew people that went to three of the very good public schools in Puerto Rico, and they had all done that. They had all taken maybe calculus already, or some of them had taken more than calculus. Yeah. By the time they had graduated high school. I guess I can only speak for my case. It was a private school, which, to be fair, at some point it started like dipping in quality. And then at the very, very end, when I want to say maybe in 10th or 11th grade, it started kind of like going up again in quality. But as far as I know, in general, schools don't have that much connection to universities, unless they're the good ones, in the sense that maybe you take advanced classes in school, or maybe you take college classes while you're in high school, things like this. I think, from what I know, it's more of the really good schools or the better schools that do this.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so then when you went from high school to undergrad, you went to university in Puerto Rico?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So what was that experience like?
Oh, it was great. So it was great partly because, I guess a little context too, in Puerto Rico, I received the Pell Grant, and that Pell Grant just covered all the tuition costs and more. So all of a sudden I went from my mom having to pay for my high school to me getting money for going to university, like not that much, but it was enough I didn't need to ask my mom for any kind of money to eat or to be able to get to school, because I had the train. The classes where I could choose them, a lot of the professors, if you looked around, you could get good professors. So if you looked around, you could, and if you tried, you can get good teachers more on like in high school, where you're stuck with good or bad, whatever you get.
Yeah.
I also, when I went to, I started in accounting. Okay. I started in accounting. I think I did accounting for 2 years. I chose accounting because it sounded, a few friends of mine were going to accounting. My mom had gone to accounting. I thought it was a fine choice. I mean, it's a decent job, whatnot. So I started in accounting. My first year was not the best. I remember it was, so we had to take a social science class that was, in our university, you have to take, I think it was about 21 credits of general studies. And so 6 credit had to be in social science. And the first year, they just give you the class. They give you a schedule. You can't change it, but they give it to you. They give one to you, and I just took it, and I went to my professor and was like, "Holy crap, that class was way harder than anything I had ever taken in high school." I was like, the shift just took me off guard.
What was the class on?
It was a social science class, and it was a specific topic I don't remember very well. I remember him mostly going through stories, and at the end you had to like write a little short essay explaining what was the fundamental thing that he was trying to get across, which is okay. That was kind of subjective. I was kind of annoyed sometimes by that. But he was, I mean, the teacher was good though. I enjoyed him, even though he failed most of us. it was a fun experience to be in his class.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the test though.
Yeah.
But anyways, I suddenly had freedom. So in high school, I started learning about a little bit of physics. Like, it was interesting,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't really think of it as something I could. Actually, no. I thought about it as, if I don't like accounting, maybe I can just do physics or something like. It was something I knew about, but I didn't really think about it as the option.
Yeah.
So I started studying accounting. I realized how boring it is. And at some point, like, I like physics, because I was watching a lot of documentaries, I remember in that time. So I decided, okay, maybe I shouldn't jump ship, because who knows what it's like. So I remember while I was still studying accounting, I took Calculus 1. And I was going to take Physics 1, but, because I play field hockey. And the semester I was going to take Physics 1, I had one tournament in Mexico, which was like 2 weeks. So I actually did register for the class, but I lost 2 weeks because of this tournament. And then I was going to have a second tournament later in that semester. And when I came back from the first tournament, I was like, oh, what's this?
So behind, right?
What are we talking about? What was the topic? It was General Physics 1, so it must have been, they had finished kinematics and vectors. So they probably were talking about Newton's force.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, holy crap, I don't even know what the first topic is.
Yeah.
So I had to drop it. But I had decided, okay, I don't like accounting. I did like the little I understood of this physics stuff I liked, so I just switched.
Mm-hmm.
So next semester I couldn't take physics because they only taught physics 1 the first semester.
Mm-hmm.
So I just took a few maths classes and continued on.
Do you think we could explore a little bit more as to those motivations, as to like, so going from accounting, which in my perspective seems like a very pragmatic, practical type of work, right, to something like physics, which is very abstract, like you could almost say idealistic type of work. Like you mentioned in high school, you were kind of interested in physics, and you kind of, at that point, somewhere along the line, determined it was like a backup. What led you to think in the first place that it could be a backup for you?
I mean, I wouldn't say that it became a backup. I would say that I never took physics in high school. Okay. So the most I got was chemistry. So the only reason I learned anything about physics is because I kind of ran into it at some point, probably in YouTube, I'm guessing.
So
or maybe in History Channel.
Physics wasn't a requirement in the high school?
No, there was no physics class in the high school.
Oh, so you could not even take physics in high school?
In fact, I remember I was in the advanced math class in my school, and we took pre-calculus.
Oh, so they never... I mean, I was going to ask you about the track, the math and physics tracks and science tracks that you had in school in general as well, but I would like to know about that, but I also want to continue with your question too. So,
I mean, we can. I mean, maybe that'll give a little context.
Sure.
What's the level? So yeah, and from what I remember, I think in 9th grade I took algebra. 10th grade I took geometry. 9th grade algebra. 10th grade geometry. 11th grade, I don't remember. I know I took pre-calculus in the 12th grade. In terms of science, I took, I think, biology 9th grade. Or no, 10th grade biology. I think it was 11th grade chemistry, and 12th grade I didn't have any science. There was no.
Oh, wow.
And I think in part, I think in Puerto Rico they have a lot of difficulty finding, like, especially physics teachers.
Okay.
Because I remember a few friends of mine, actually one friend of mine taught high school for a year, and all he needed to get the permit to do that was a bachelor's, and I think it was 9 or 12 credits of physics.
Wow.
That was, I think the issue in terms of physics, for example, is that there's just not enough people that know the subject to teach it. So going back to, so that's partly what was, to me, physics wasn't even, it's not a subject I even took in high school. It was just something I ran into. I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even say that that I put it in the second category, it went up from nothing to the second category.
Yeah, so I mean, if anything, that makes it more interesting that you ended up in physics and that you had no traditional exposure to it in the first place, right? So,
I mean, I always liked. So actually, I remember thinking, I forgot this. When I was changing to physics, I thought, oh, I also like philosophy. But I thought also, I don't like reading all the crap they're going to make me read. So then no. And I don't think I'll ever get a job. I don't know what I can do with a philosophy degree. So I'll just go with physics. I kind of liked math in high school. I like philosophy that they kind of talk about some interesting things every once in a while, a lot of the time. Let's just go with physics.
Yeah.
But yeah, and for the most part, in terms of the counting being a practical thing versus physics being fairly idealistic. I always just thought I'd like to think of it for myself. So I think it was enough important to me that my job forced me to think, I guess. It was good enough that I had a job and I could just think about things by myself or with friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So did you first choose accounting because it was something that you saw was like practical that you could get a job with and then do all these other things you were interested in thinking about on the side? Or were there other reasons that you chose to go into accounting first?
Oh, sorry. No, I didn't mean to imply that I thought about it. I didn't mean to imply that I thought about it that much. No.
Okay.
The big reason I went to accounting is, essentially everybody for most of my life says, oh, you have to go to college. That's the right choice. I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, from what I can see, yeah, going to college is a very important thing. So, okay, I'll go to college. What? I don't know. I don't care that much about anything. This is me in 12th grade. I have a couple friends that go to accounting. My mom went to accounting. I mean, accounting seems like a fine choice, considering a few other choices. Accounting seems like a fine choice. And I thought, well, I kind of like physics, from what I've heard, from what I've seen from documentaries. So that was kind of like a second choice.
I see. So if there was no cultural pressure for you to go to college, what would you have done after high school?
I mean, I probably would have gone to college because, I was smart enough to realize that college you really didn't want to go to college if you wanted to get a really good job. Maybe had I been in a family that was more like had mechanics, had more mechanics and more in the trades, I think you call it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in that case, I would have seen, okay, no, actually I can do trades.
Yeah.
And make a living out of that and enjoy the rest of my life like this.
Okay.
But around my high school, neither of my schools had anything to do with trade.
I see.
That kind of teaching you that kind of skill. So it was like that wasn't really an option.
Okay.
That wasn't something I thought about because it was never around me.
That makes sense.
So I think I would have probably always went to high school in this environment that I lived.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like, in terms of, like, the German system, right? Because in Germany, I think the way they do it is, you go to high school and then at some point you decide whether you're going down the trade path or you're going down the academic college path, right? And those are two kind of separate tracks that they try to prepare you for in advance. So I wonder,
That's during high school that you choose that?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think so, but I'm not positive. My stepdad told me about it at some point, but I forget the details, the intricacies. But yeah, that's interesting because, I mean, I guess we do have a shortage of people going into trade jobs here, right? They are definitely in need and desire in terms of the demand for the economy. But yeah, so I mean, I also did like a little bit of accounting work for like one summer while I was kind of just job surfing. My stepmother is she's a biller for medical practice, right? And so I picked up some work there, and yeah, for me it was kind of mind-numbing work, right? It's just like you're literally just a calculator, right? You're just, well, in my experience, I was just adding up numbers, keeping track of totals and stuff, and it was like not very stimulating. And so for me personally, in that environment, I would go crazy. So I mean, if I was in your shoes, I would say you made the right choice.
No.
But
I mean, I'm sure it can get a little bit more advanced.
Yeah, of course.
You might have to do some investigation, figure out where these report. Like,
to be fair, they gave you the worst part of it. I mean, because in fact, in like bigger firms, they have all this software that just does most of the thing for you.
Yeah.
Like when you take accounting classes, what they teach you is essentially what I would say like rules of bookkeeping, and what are like what are the right ways of doing like bookkeeping in general, which is I didn't find very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So one more, well, maybe a couple more things I wanted to touch on from your homeland is, I don't want to get too political on here, but so you could try to avoid that if you want to. But so how do you feel about our current administration and how we as a country have dealt with, Puerto Rico after the Hurricane Maria and stuff like that? How do you feel the state of Puerto Rico is currently? Do you feel like perhaps the administration should be doing more? Is there something that we should be advocating for in terms of, bringing some things to light in terms of like not enough advocacy for Puerto Ricans?
I mean, I really don't know because I mean, whatever you say about Puerto Rico, it's not a state. So like a lot of time people say, they're not treated the same as a state. Well, they're not a state. So I would say like the question is, okay, they're not a state. Maybe they shouldn't be. The question from the Puerto Rican standpoint is like, how are you going to treat us? And based on that, we will respond, I guess. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in Puerto Rico want to be a state, and they want to be treated the same way. And from their perspective, then yes, I would say that you haven't treated us as well as a state.
Right.
Other people could say, yeah, but you're not a state, therefore we don't have to treat you like that. In which case, I would say, sure, okay. But then, for example, when Mexico and Venezuela want to bring in ships, then you should just let them in. I mean, if you're not going to treat us like a state, then give us the freedom to act like the way we think it should be done. In the case of like what happened with Hurricane Maria, I know for a fact that, or I read articles that said, there are Mexican and there are ships essentially from other countries. I remember Venezuela and Mexico being two of them. They were just anchored outside the island because it took Trump, I think, 10 days to lift the Jones Act, which prevented non-U.S. ships from going to Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. So, for example, that being thinking that you should treat them as well as a state or not, well, that was just negligent from them. That was too slow. I mean,
yeah,
that's nothing to do. How much do we do for you? It's like what are we stopping you from doing? That's a complete so that for example, that's completely I would say completely wrong.
Yeah.
But in terms of Maria, I know. I mean, at the end of the day, you did help a lot. I don't know, and I was not there while it happened. So all I know as much as not as much, maybe a little bit more because I have family who give me anecdotes and friends who gave me anecdotes. But so there were just as many anecdotes about, or not many, there were the same way there were anecdotes about how FEMA had left this huge storage of water there for months because they didn't have the logistic capability of this, distributing it or whatever. I also had a friend that told me, he was helping FEMA and they went to one of the pueblos, and the mayor of that pueblo went up to him and just took water, just asked him, give me that water, and just left. Which is not a problem with the United States, it's a problem with like the internal problems of Puerto Rico, and what I would claim is the low quality of the political class. Okay. I was actually telling someone else the other this kind of changes a little bit the topic in terms of the relationship U.S. Puerto Rico. Another friend from physics was asking me about what we were talking about politics, and at some point I told him, I was explaining to him the problems that Puerto Ricans have caused themselves in the sense in like their own political culture. like their own politics. So I just said, okay, why would the United States accept unincorporated territory which bankrupt into a state? Because he was saying, oh, I think they should be a state. Why would you do that? Why would you take an unincorporated territory that's bankrupt? Why? I don't know. Morals? Okay, good. Okay, let me ask you something. Why don't you just take off all the embargoes and let Puerto Rico trade and manage their own diplomatic relationships with the rest of the world by themselves, so they can build up their own infrastructure, which however if they want to specialize with the United States, they'll probably do that, but whatever. If they can, or we can, get ourselves out of it now that we don't have these extra restrictions due to the United States, then we have proven that we are capable of being a good state, and which I think from the side of the people who want statehood, I think would be a stronger case. Like, oh, we are as good or better than many of your own states. We should be a part of the union because we want to, and we have already this relationship with you. Mm-hmm. And from the people from the side of the pro-independence people, well, they have proven that they can be an independent state or independent country. Now they have to convince the rest of their people, okay, it's a better choice than being with the United States. Mm-hmm. So that's how I fall.
Okay. So where do you personally fall on that side of the fence? Pro-independence or pro-statehood in terms of...
I mean, mostly because of sentimental reasons, I fall on the pro-independence. But if they want to be a state, that's not going to keep me from sleeping.
Okay.
I care more about them. I care more about so I feel Puerto Rican people have a problem of self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And which I would rather, and if they resolve that and then want to join the United States or be independent, I care more that if they resolve that and still want to be a part of the United States, that's fine with me. That's not that.
Okay, could you explain more? What do you mean by problem with self-esteem?
Problem with self-esteem is the ease with which, or the view with which people look at how everything done by the United States in general is taken to be automatically good. Mm-hmm. Like, if we want to resolve a problem, if the government wants to resolve a problem, typically what they do is they look at someone from some state from the United States, maybe the federal government, and they try to imitate them. It's oftentimes, all the time, you'll hear politicians talking about colonized people, and I mean, when two parties are when all the politicians are using the same term, it means nothing. So even almost the politicians keep talking about being colonized people, and they're just reacting to whatever the United States wants to do or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, that seems less like a self-esteem issue and rather like a critical thinking capacity. Like something that we've been advocating a lot for on the podcast is in terms of like educating people and in terms of like allowing them to properly question things and come to conclusions for themselves, right? And so I don't know if you have any questions along this line, if anything's coming to your head, but to me, this seems like more like an education issue than a self-esteem or like mental health kind of thing.
I mean, I would say that a lack of self-esteem can stop you from being a critical thinker. Okay. Because if I am capable of realizing why you're wrong, but don't have the self-esteem to act on it. So for example, I build this argument that completely proves to me that you're wrong, but I still see you as the figure that is always right. Yeah. Then the problem, the thing that's stopping me is not my critical thinking; it's my self-esteem. Yeah. So I think in this case, the the problem of self-esteem is partly why a major reason why there's no critical thinking or less critical thinking than perhaps there could be.
Yeah, I take your point. Anything to add to this, Irene?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess like from your perspective, what do you think has formed this kind of environment in Puerto Rico?
Well,
Well, like a fear to question or what caused that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so it's been more than 100 years now since Puerto Rico and the United States have had a relationship. And at first, the beginning, from what I know of history, essentially the United States would choose a general governor, usually an actual general, send it to Puerto Rico, and he would be the governor of Puerto Rico, so general governor. And for a long time, they were not the nicest people. There were at least 2 massacres on their people chosen by the president of the United States. Something that these governors would often do is, Puerto Rico is Caribbean, so it's very fertile land, especially for sugarcane. Apparently, I heard once it's one of the best in terms of yield per area. It was one of the best in the world. So something they did is they brought all these U.S. companies, bought all the land from the local agricultures, and then monocultured the crop.
Yeah.
So they would specialize in sugarcane because all these people were coming here to get huge amounts of sugarcane per area.
Yeah.
So that's what happened in the sugarcane. And during, I think it was in the 1930s, Puerto Rico and United States allowed Puerto Rico to get their own constitution, which was approved by Congress. And so obviously the first governor of Puerto Rico was very friendly to the United States. So, the United States, at some point when they gave us citizenship to people in Puerto Rico, they did that by tying it to the Jones Act, which essentially the trade is we get citizenship, they get our ports and our essentially our borders. So that's why we can't trade directly with other countries. All ships have to go to U.S. mainland and then go to Puerto Rico. So it's movement, things like that. The U.S. has always had influence in Puerto Rico. Like, if you go to Puerto Rico, it's very hard to walk places because most of the roads were built by either United States engineers or with a lot of U.S. influence, which they wanted to import their cars. That's my understanding of what happened for the roads, the infrastructure of the roads. It was U.S. car companies wanted to import their cars because it was a new market. So, because of our relationship with the United States, they had very favorable conditions. So if they could get the Puerto Rico to be a very car-based society, I guess, then that just got a huge market for them, even though it was a small country or a small place. So yeah, steps like that. There have been cases where Puerto Rico has traded with other which has like signed contracts or not contracts, treaties, I guess it would be, with other contracts that put I think there was one case with Japan, some chips or something, and then the Congress said nope, you can't do that, and so we had to just back off from the treaty. Or for example, I know with Dominican Republic we have several I think they're called accords because they can't since you can't sign treaties, you kind of like accord with that we kind of make an accord with the Dominican Republic, and so it's like a under the table treaty kind of thing. It's like we'll do these for each other, but we're not gonna make it official like most countries.
Yeah.
And I mean that changes a lot in your mentality when you can't think of I'm gonna trade with Spain or Japan or something like that. I'll trade with you first. I have to trade with you first. And I'm like, okay, after 100 years of you trading with him first, then Also, because people can jump so easily from Puerto Rico to the United States, there are more Puerto Ricans in the United States than there are in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So you start also making connections to, especially like New York, places like Miami. You kind of start building connections to those.
Yeah.
And so, like, not everything is illegitimate. Like, not everything is in a bad sense.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So I was just listening to a podcast by Radiolab on a very similar topic. So the interesting case study in relation to this is American Samoa, right? And so they're kind of where Puerto Rico was 100 years ago in terms of basically they're the one territory that the United States owns that they're not automatically granted citizenship for being born there, right? And so it's an interesting case study because they have some traditions or laws that are kind of seem inherently like a little iffy, like kind of racist, but it's in their self-interest, right? So like, for instance,
Samoan people?
Yeah, exactly. So like, for instance, for anyone to buy land on Samoa, as I recall from the podcast, is that you have to at least be 50% Samoan, right? And so that would prevent this kind of case of like where people would come in and buy up the land for, agriculture or whatever, some countries coming in and like kind of decimating the culture. But it is also inherently racist, right? In the sense that like you could have Samoan people there, and if you're under 50%, you're kind of like shit out of luck, right? And that's not right either. So the Constitution would guarantee you those civil liberties in terms of like you have the right to, you can't be discriminated against for your race, or there's your sexual preferences or your religion or whatever, right? So there's a lot of baggage that comes with citizenship and stuff like that, and so like it comes with all the civil liberties, but at the same time it comes with all the like capitalistic kind of baggage that kind of works generally towards the detriment of that native culture, right, in the name of globalism or whatever. So I don't know how you feel about being like a United States citizen, right? Is it kind of like, do you feel like you're an American, or does it feel like very distinct in terms of like Puerto Ricans are not Americans, like we can say we are, but in name, but perhaps in practice it's a very different culture? And
I mean, I would say that Puerto Rico is definitely a Hispanic culture. If I were to meet some random person from Spain or from Argentina or Mexico, I expect to have more in common with the person from Spain, Mexico, Argentina, than I would do with a random American. I know I think of myself as, I've always thought of myself as Puerto Rican, and kind of like the United States was over there, I guess. Like I never thought of myself as American. I know that a lot of people in Puerto Rico do feel like they're Americans, especially for example, like the people who are pro-state. Sometimes I've seen them when they either debate or respond to some pro-independence person or someone who's kind of in that, like talking in that kind of tone, like kind of manner, right, or attitude. They sometimes start like saying, "No, we are American citizens" and stuff like that. So I would say that we are fairly divided. I think that's a fair thing to say. And I think the referendums that have gone in Puerto Rico. So the 2017 one is not a good benchmark, but the 2012 one I think is a good benchmark, because you see a 40-something% of the people who voted being pro statehood, but that is less than 50%. And in fact, that referendum had 2 questions, and I wanted to say something around 15. I think it was less than 20%, but more than 15% of the people who voted for the first question did not vote for the second question, in which they asked, do you want to be a statehood independent or not? They just left it blank. So I would say that I would guess that there's a big percentage of people who feel they're part of the United States.
Yeah.
But I guess it's kind of like what Americans, they're the biggest minority, I would say. I would say, yeah.
And if we could tie this back to physics, how do you think, well, from your perspective, do you feel that being a Puerto Rican gives you a unique perspective in physics at all? Like, do you feel like perhaps you might have a more novel or unique way of solving problems in comparison to, the majority Americans that, solve problems? Do you find yourself looking at situations differently compared to your peers?
I don't know if I would say that I solve physics problems differently. And I would say that it's not hard to believe. It's not hard to see why, because most of my professors studied either in the United States. Many of them studied. I know one of them studied in London. Like most of them are U.S. or maybe European PhDs. So I guess I wouldn't expect most of us to have a wildly different way of thinking about physics, because we kind of come from the same tradition, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah.
So I guess if there were where the real difference would come, I think, would be maybe in the terms of attitude, or more like in the social part of decision making. It's like I want to go back to Puerto Rico. If a handful of good professors went to Puerto Rico, then it would make a much bigger difference than a handful of professors going to, I don't want to say MIT, I want to say a good school that's kind of Long Beach, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, Long Beach already has a decent number of good professors.
Yeah.
Versus Puerto Rico, which has, they have okay professors. Not very good teachers, but they.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the case of Puerto Rico, if you could resolve some of the administrative issues, that the quality of the students would go up very quickly, because then you have most of the good students in math, and most of the good students in all the good students in physics will end up either in my university or in Mayagüez, because that's the only two places where you can study physics.
Right. Okay.
So out of the entire Puerto Rican population, you could easily get the good students.
Yeah.
Versus unlike in the United States, where it is very hard to get the good students because there's too many of them. There's too many people.
Yeah. I mean, I have a question already in my head, but I want to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, go ahead. You can give the question.
To jump in, right? So it's so I think that's an important thing to notice, right? I think that's a pretty interesting statement, because if I understand your argument, you're saying like basically the impact you could have as an educator, right, is larger if you were to go to someplace like Puerto Rico, where perhaps there aren't as many, or perhaps the quality that you could find at a lot of major U.S. institutions that have this perhaps more preparation in terms of like educating and expertise in the field and stuff like that. And so perhaps if what you care about is increasing the number of people, the number of minds that are solving difficult problems and care about solving difficult problems like physics problems, then you should consider, going to Puerto Rico, or perhaps some, community which doesn't have availability to your resources, such as an educator.
Right. So yeah, that's the specific choice I made was that one. I mean, I can imagine other choices. For example, something you would never think of, I would never think of, is a university who trains a medical school who trains doctors to go to rural areas, or to go around the world to affect the most amount of people by going to the worst places where you get small amounts of good doctors.
Yeah.
Well, the many bad things you can say about Cuba, they have a very good medical school that does exactly that. I remember when I heard that for the first time, I was like, what? A school who, as one of their aims, is to get people from all over Latin America, train them, and then send them back, so that they can make a big impact in all over Latin America. So, I mean, in the United States, that would mean In the case of physics, one example of that in our analogy in physics would be you could train a physicist to go to places where you normally don't expect.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are many smart people, I'm sure, in many small towns, or not even small towns. They don't even have to be that small. But who thinks of Mississippi when you think of smart people? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry to Mississippi people from Mississippi. They don't think about that in Puerto Rico either. So.
Yeah.
I mean, so you think about like MIT, New York. You think about California, stuff like that. I mean, there's 50 states.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean,
and that's still keeping to the idea of like maximizing where you get your pool of students. I mean, there are others that if I can probably come up with more examples of new things that community maybe could do, but just doesn't care yet because they don't have any perhaps cultural history for them to care at large. But for example, no, keep going. So I'll try to come up with a second example so we can have a second one.
Right.
And I'm not just saying a lot of hot air.
Okay. So.
Can I ask a question, I guess?
Yeah, go ahead. Jump in.
So, I mean, I guess, what do you think would be more motivating to get more people to be teaching physics? Specifically, qualified people who maybe learned physics in some reputable university to go back to these areas of need. And what are the barriers to stop them from going to these areas? Like, you have this goal, you want to, it seems like you want to help your community, right? Yeah. And you want to, in a way, change the community in the way maybe physics is taught or in the universities you went to. So you can reach more potential physicists who can then come from Puerto Rico and contribute to the field. So what's the barriers for more people to do that? And what do you think could encourage more people to do what you're doing?
As to the barriers, the barriers I can think of are, for example, reputation. Like, we tend to want to go to places with very high reputations. When you're a graduating undergrad, you want to go to MIT and Caltech, even though you don't really know almost anything about these places. You just know the name. It's like, oh my God, Caltech, MIT. So one of the barriers is reputation and how much we care about it. Second, difficulty is when you go to big institutions with a lot of reputation, it's easier to get funding. I mean, being the same quality of researcher in a bigger university can more easily, you have easier access to grants, for example. I remember there was a time where in my university we had a scandal about some scandal with the funding, with the NSF funding, and for a couple of years I remember our professors were having a harder time getting grants just because of that. It has nothing to do with the quality of research. It had to do with the bad reputation of the university. So yeah, in that sense, there are things that the person can't do to improve the situation. In terms of incentivizing, I don't know. I mean, my reason is purely love for my community, I guess. I mean, like a emotional connection to where I used to come, and I wanted to go back. I mean, you can always artificially go to a few universities and say, oh, the NSF you can envision the NSF going to, I don't know, take 10 decent middle to low middle quality, say, I'm going to fund you 10 positions or 5 positions for the next 5 to 10 years of your university. Can take those 5 positions in 5 or 10 years and keep and like an initial investment in the universities in middle to lower middle or lower universities. That's something they could do. And if then the universities that take advantage of that, then they can probably do a lot. Because I mean, if you suddenly get 5 professors and you treat them well and you keep them I don't know how to say, like, feed them what they need.
Yeah.
They'll grow, and then they can make a decent department. I mean,
yes, of course,
that's something that could happen.
It's interesting, yeah.
But without the initial funding, they can't do that. That's something that can be done.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the primary thing that's holding people back from going back to these communities and having a bigger impact is money, right? So it's related to funding, but a little distinct in the fact that, like, I know, for instance, if you're studying to become a medical doctor, right, a lot of people end up becoming specialized in a certain topic or a certain part of the body, right? Because you'll get paid a lot more than a general practitioner who takes care of, like, just a wide gamut of issues for the family, right? And so I think it's a very similar instance of the distinction. Like, so you're getting an incentive in both aspects, I think, like in this, treating the medical example from the program you referenced in Cuba, right? The incentive that you're getting, right, for going to these, I don't know the proper word, these disadvantaged communities, right? So is that you're promoting you're perhaps the wrong word, but exploiting this emotional reaction towards helping people, right? Your altruistic tendencies, right? That's the incentive. But you also have to recognize that that incentive is coming at a sacrifice of, if you were to go to the United States and become a specialist in whatever, you're sacrificing this potential, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, right? So it's a difference in perspective and ideology, and so I guess you could say it's a byproduct of a capitalistic society, right? In terms of in the West, I guess a lot of people feel that you have to take care of yourself first and then your community, and elsewhere it could be the opposite, right? And so perhaps fixing this issue of finding people that are qualified to moving to areas where they could have a greater impact has to do with a much deeper issue of, them being able to find enough value in terms of helping people versus helping themselves. So I don't know. I want to get you guys' take. I said a lot there, so I want to see how you guys feel about that.
You go ahead.
I mean, that's definitely that to a certain extent is definitely going on. It did remind me, though, that my brother's girlfriend is studying medicine. And oddly enough, I wouldn't have expected this, but in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of subspecialties that are not that many people. There's a handful, if any. And I remember her saying, if I forgot exactly what kind of doctor she said, but which is the kind of doctor she wanted to be. If I become this kind of doctor, and I go to the west part of the island, so for context, like the metropolis area of the big city in quotes, in Puerto Rico, is in San Juan, which is in north central eastern, a little bit east area of Puerto Rico. She said, if I go to the south, I'll make tons of money because I will be the only specialist there.
Right.
So every single person in the west side of the island will just will come to me because I'm the only one that can treat them.
Yeah.
So sometimes I don't know. I wonder if that could be a general thing that's going on, that people either they're not thinking of, oh wait, there's this market over here. Let's say put in, I guess the capitalist wording. There's this market over here that I could exploit immensely, but because I'm focused in the big city, for example, which is why I mentioned the reputation. Yeah. If I'm focused on being in the big place with the big people, then I don't want to go there. Yeah. And that also reminds me something very curious. I remember my brother's girlfriend telling me, there's this one scientist in the medical school, which is apparently like a huge big shot in fear research. I think it was like he studied the reaction of fear in animals. And he was one of the biggest people in the world about this. And I remember her telling me, yeah, I mean, he likes being here. Partly, one of the reasons he likes being here is because he's the big, he's the huge fish.
Yeah.
He's not the big fish. He's the huge fish.
Yeah.
Unlike if he were in, what is it, Princeton Medical School, which is a really big one, right?
Yeah.
Then he would be another big fish.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's also something some people aren't thinking about. It's like, you can be the big fish with the big fish, or you can be the huge fish with either medium or small fish, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that is something I was also aware about, that, you know, in terms of doctors in rural areas, actually, that is an interesting counterpoint in the fact that I do know you could go to more rural areas and get paid a lot more, but you're sacrificing, you know, perhaps being around a lot more things to do and friends and things of the nature. Yeah. But, yeah, and the point that you just brought up, I think, is something that really impacts mental health in terms of graduate school, right? I think it's always important to feel like you're at least close to equal footing with your peers, right? Like, rather than, you know, being a big fish in a small pond, being a big fish in a big pond, right? So like if you're just one of many students and your perspective is that they're more qualified than you, that they're more prepared, you know, it can feed into this imposter syndrome of like, you feel like you don't deserve to be there, and you feel like, you know, people are going to find you out, and that can really have a negative impact in terms of your mental health and therefore your own sense of value in your work in terms of graduate school. So I don't know if you guys see that in your own particular experience. I guess like perhaps I could invite you to jump in. Like, what's your experience, Irene, in terms of do you compare yourself ever to your peers, and how do you feel about that, like in general, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's natural for the most part for people to compare themselves to the others around them as a check to see whether they are where they're supposed to be, I guess, in terms of where you are in the environment that you are in the moment. I think it's a natural thing. So, of course, I do it. I would say that I never really feel that I am at the level that let's say, I wouldn't say that I feel I'm at the level of the majority, let's say, you know what I mean? So I usually tend to feel like I am not good enough to be, let's say, studying physics or in this program or doing theory. So I don't feel like I am, for some reason, have the capabilities to be successful in what I am passionate about. But at the same time, I know that it's probably a combination of factors that I've encountered up to this point that have kind of created this perception in my mind that I am not of the mind that's capable of doing this specific type of work, which I don't think is necessarily true. I feel like if someone is passionate and interested in a topic, they should have the freedom to explore what they're interested in, period, you know. I think that in general in the culture, it seems like a lot of times, I mean, maybe it's getting better, who knows, but it seems like there's like an emphasis on these specific type of mind and type of skills that a person needs to have to be able to be successful in this area of physics, let's say, specifically theory, let's say. That there's this idea that there's only like a specific type of person that can pursue this path. Where I feel like it should be more like if you have the passion, interest, and drive to explore these questions and you want to work in this area, that you should have the full freedom to do that. And it's your choice whenever it occurs. If you want to choose, maybe I'm not getting far in this and there's something else I want to explore, then you can change. But I think there is toxicity in the culture right now where even like even if it's not overtly spoken, I feel like it's this idea that it's like you have to be the super genius to do particle theory, or you have to have some level of like IQ or something to do particle theory, that kind of idea, where I don't think it's helpful, because I think it kind of throws away a lot of people who mind might work differently but also could contribute as a whole, with all the different diversity of mind that I think is necessary. So I think that particularly I've probably been subjected to seeing that the culture values a specific type of person, then I don't necessarily feel like I fit in with that type of person. So I've definitely felt like I am not good enough to be there, but there's enough passion and interest in that subject that I still do it anyway. So it's kind of like a struggle, I guess, every day to kind of tell myself, no, like I'm not an imposter. I deserve to be here. I'm interested in this. That's really what's driving me, and I have to keep going for what I'm interested in and what drives me, right? So have to keep pushing through that barrier. But I think that that's a part of the culture that needs to be bring into light, needs to be discussed, and I think it needs to change, personally. I mean, there's more things I could say, but I want to see your perspective, Gabe, on what you think about the culture in general and imposter syndrome and
I mean,
expectations and.
Yeah, I agree with you that that kind of mentality is definitely predominant, at least in the theory part, from what I can see, at least in the high energy condensed matter kind of, at least from the professors I can see from condensed matter, high energy theory, they seem to be like the kind of people that are just super intense, and also a lot of the students are very intense. They're very just driven to do that one thing. And yeah, if I think about the icons of high energy theory, Feynman and Stringer.
Yeah.
I mean, Feynman was kind of a clown a little bit, but he was within that clown, he was an insanely obsessive person in terms of how intense he was with his physics, and that's the kind of people that I guess molded them the mindset in to a large extent in physics. I don't know if some other subfields are slightly different. I don't know anything about biophysics. But
yeah, exactly.
So maybe, hopefully, it's different in those other areas. But I would definitely say, in what we've been seeing, I would agree with your assessment, about the culture. It's very, very intense. And I would say really don't. If for people who do get imposter syndrome, I don't have a huge problem with imposter syndrome. I've felt it a few times. Not because not so much comparing myself to other students that can do the work that I can't. Mostly more in the sense that the professors gave me work that I couldn't do. I'm like, oh crap, am I good enough to this is what they expect of me? I can't do it. Am I good enough? Or I just get exhausted to the point that it's do I even like this anymore?
Yeah,
That's
of course.
happened to me a few times. And to be honest, so far, after a day or two, it just goes by. Maybe I take a rest or something and it subsides. But yeah, if people that get imposter syndrome, I would say don't take too seriously the idea of should I be here? You're here. Forget if it's fair. Who cares? You're here. What matter if it's fair for the next person to get here? I don't know, but you're already there. Just forget about whether it's fair or not, or you deserve to be there or not. You're there. So that I guess I think that's something I would say to people who get imposter syndrome, at least in the case of physics. Forget about the do I deserve it? Should I be here? Forget about that question. You're here. Just do what you can. If your professor throws you out of the group, then okay. that's a different issue though.
Yeah.
But if it's you telling yourself, oh, I shouldn't be here, forget about it. You're here. To be honest.
We had a conversation about a similar kind of thing when Juan Mejia was on. And so in general, I agree with your assessment of how it's not very useful to to overthink these things about whether or not you deserve to be here. But at the same point, I just want to add that, there is inherent utility in that feeling. And that's what I'm trying to exploit now, is because the utility is that this feeling of imposter syndrome is kind of like a reaction to, well, for me personally, it's a reaction to some things that I feel are systemically wrong with the field in terms of how it's putting barriers in front of me and other people. And this feeling is kind of what is telling me that there is something wrong here, right? And so because I am now aware of the fact that there's something wrong, I am now in a position where I could do something about it, right? If I could be self-reflective of that feeling to the point where I could at least adequately, try to diagnose where this is coming from, this feeling, suddenly I feel like I am empowered in the sense that I can suddenly change the community in terms of, oh, this is where this feeling is coming from. Now I can try to shape the community to be different, right? So that it's not as toxic, or it's better for, future generations, kind of thing. So I agree that it's not going to happen in our generation, right? I can't just instantly change the field. Even if I could, I don't know if I'd want to, but so it's like tough. I'm going to have to deal with that, right? However I come to terms with, the shit that comes tossed my way, I'm going to have to deal with that, right? But I think it is interesting in the fact that, these hardships are what gives me insight in terms of providing for the community around me.
Oh, that's a fair point. And I mean, since we're clarifying more, like I easily say, just don't think about it too much. I've been there. It's not easy not to think about it. It's like, we have to find our ways of solving things. And I mean, being reflexive is almost always a good thing. And part of life is just figuring out how you deal with life.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I have a related question. It's very similar, but it's not the same. How do you feel about your place in physics? Like, what is your level of confidence in terms of like the skills that you have? Do you feel like you're an expert? Do you feel like you're close to being an expert? Do you feel like you know nothing? Where on that spectrum do you feel like you lie?
I definitely don't think I'm close to being an expert. In fact, I do feel a bit of frustration that I don't feel myself capable of asking myself important questions yet in my own field. Like I do hadron physics. I specifically work in what's called in the GlueX experiment, and I still can't sit down and say, okay, come up with a question and say, okay, yeah, this is a good question. I still don't feel like I can do that, which is kind of annoying to me. What level I would say I'm at, that's a hard one to say, but I would say that I've learned a few skills that allow me to do what I guess has to be done in terms of the research, like the skills that involve doing the research, but I still don't have a sense of, or a perspective perhaps, in terms of this is why we're here, this is why we're doing it, this is what we should do. Like I still don't have, I kind of know why we're here because I've been reading, I've gone on my way to read a lot of papers. I convinced a few of the other hadron physics students let's take a Wednesday and start reading a paper every Wednesday and talk about it a little bit. So I know I understand somewhat why we're here. Exactly what are we doing? I still am trying to figure out in terms of the technical part, because I work in a big experiment which has several layers of software and processing that if I could easily do my research without even knowing it existed. And then the physics that has to be involved with it. I don't need equations anymore for the most part. I which is completely different from every physics class I've ever had. I don't know about you guys. All they teach us is how to solve equations, but this time, no, they're not trying to solve any equation. I'm not trying to use pen and paper or anything. I'm just trying to think. Usually my advisor just thinks conceptually. I think these things should happen. Therefore, these are the right variables, and this is the kind of thing we want. This is the kind of analysis we want to do. Okay, that's completely different from anything I've done in any class. They've taught me to solve integrals and to solve partial differential equations and stuff like that.
Irene, you want to jump in first?
No, you go ahead. I don't really have much to say on that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so in my personal experience, I do have to do math and stuff like that. So at first it was I was about to name drop, but I'm going to avoid the temptation. So I've done order of magnitude calculations in terms of physics. So I did have to use some stuff I learned in dynamics and stuff like that. And then at that point, once we got to a point where we asked a question, I don't know how much it was me asking the questions or it was me being guided to ask the questions. So it's difficult for me to say how prepared I feel in that aspect. But now it's just like a lot of statistical analysis and stuff. So I am still writing equations. It's just strictly math though, not physics. And then so when I write those equations, that's like 10% of the time. And then the other 90% is trying to code those equations and make sure that they work the way I want them to work. And so, so it's still not, it's still mainly not the skills I was taught in classes, even though it's like a theory group and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's my personal experience. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I mean, I don't think I've done as much as research as you in general, or you either. So, and then I just joined this new group, so I'm just reading up on material. But I would say that, there's probably, depending on whether you're doing the theory or experimental, you're going to be seeing obviously more of the equations. So when I worked a little bit in nuclear theory, it was mostly coding, like you said, 10% manipulating an equation, and then now figuring out how can I code a specific potential using C.
Yeah.
So it was minimal, kind of a, manipulating equation, and then a lot of it was coding.
Yeah.
I don't know how this new group will be, so we'll let you know when I figure it out.
Yeah, we'll wait for the updates. But so maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how you ended up in hadron physics. And so I guess like it's one thing to be motivated to pursue physics, and then it's another thing to end up, physics is so broad that you could literally end up anywhere on the spectrum. So how did you end up deciding hadron physics?
In our university, we for the first year students, every Friday they have like a small seminar kind of thing where they bring in the professors from our from the department to talk about the research, and usually they're divided by topic, of course. And so I would go every Friday to us. I was initially a little more interested in theory than experiment. But then, as I saw most of the groups, I kind of started discarding people like condensed matter, not my thing. So it's kind of out. Nuclear structure reaction, kind of maybe. But I think it was mostly because I liked one of the things I liked the most about the hadron group when they gave their talk was like the atmosphere between the three professors, like more relaxed, like more friendly, and I thought that was, and I liked what they were doing, so I decided, okay, I'll go for you guys. I think first there were three, so there's three professors. I think for the first one I was interested in, he had too many students, so I went to the second one, who I also liked. I liked his presentation and his attitude, and I've had a good experience with him for, a year and a half now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in retrospect, how do you feel about ending up in the experimental / hadron group? Do you wish that you would have went somewhere else, or you feel pretty content?
I feel content. So, I mean, I will say that for the most part, I think I would have liked most physics I'd done. Had I done it with a professor I liked, or with the rest of the group, the rest of the group that I was working with, I think when you like physics, you generally like most of physics, and in my case at least, I think having a good group of people with which to work with was very important. Me liking what I was doing. I mean, I know other people wouldn't have that issue. I know some people that want to do condensed matter theory, and all they care about is having a great professor that does great research and stuff like that. And other people, no.
Yeah. I mean, so that's something that, I mean, this other perspective that you mentioned is something that and I guess the thesis of the podcast kind of comes into conflict with rather frequently in terms of I don't think it can be understated the importance of a welcoming community and stuff like that. And so when Sahana was on the podcast recently, we talked a lot about why is it that women are a much larger distribution of the population in terms of astronomy PhDs compared to physics PhDs. So like the numbers, I looked them up. Like for instance, astronomy has 40% women get PhDs, and in physics it's 16%, right? So Sahana's hypothesis was that it's a much more welcoming community, which I'm inclined to agree with. In general, I think I get this impression that astronomy and astrophysics is a little more laid back, and in terms of the professors, and they're a little more welcoming and supportive and things like that. And we talk about a lot of other reasons as to why that could be the case. But specifically in the story that you brought up, it seems very poignant in the fact that it kind of relates to how you were talking about your experience going into accounting. Is kind of like, you knew you had to do something, right? And so it's just like you kind of just ended up there, more or less, right? And so I think that's a very clear case of like the community having an impact of like who you see in your environment and stuff like that. So I just think that's interesting. Okay, and one other thing I wanted to touch on is how do you feel currently about your relationship with your advisor? Do you feel pretty comfortable with him? Do you feel like he's a pretty cool guy and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. I like him. I like working with him.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say that. I mean, I don't want to talk too much here because it's about you, but I don't think it could be understated the importance of having an advisor that, that there's mutual respect and is supportive of you and is welcoming, and everything could be copacetic in terms of how you guys communicate. Because for those of you who don't know, like in physics, it's kind of like a master apprentice kind of thing. Like you have a very meaningful, impactful relationship with your advisor in the fact that you guys are working together for 4+ years on a project, and your relationship really dictates a lot of how you're going to feel in graduate school, right? And so I think that's also why these ideas of like what it is to be a physicist, and like in terms of these ideas of like specific ways of thinking, like a specific mind, you have to perform in this way to consider yourself a physicist, can be really toxic, right? Because if you're going to be in relation with a person who feels this way, you're going to have to meet that expectation for 4+ years of your life, and it's really going to be to the detriment of you. So that's why I personally would never be the type of person that would be like, oh, I just want to make an impact in my field, so I'm just going to go for the best person in the field, because it's possible and maybe even likely that the person that's going to be great in their field can be kind of an asshole, right? And so anyways, I don't know. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I 100%, like, for me personally, I need to feel like I have respect, like, that we have mutual respect with my advisor. It has to be an open, like, environment where I feel safe to express my ideas, even though I might at first feel like the idea might be stupid or something. I have to feel like I have the ability to express what I'm thinking and ask questions, right? Even if they're stupid, and not feel like I'm going to be judged by my advisor, in a negative way. So I definitely think that for me, number one is I have to have that community, that environment, where I can feel safe, right? And it seems like that was your number one priority too, right? In finding a group, would you say? Like if you didn't feel comfortable in the group, would you have stayed, or would you have found another group?
No, in fact, I did change group. I mean, I originally was in nuclear theory. I didn't like, it wasn't a bad experience with the professor, but I didn't think there there was chemistry, I guess.
Yeah.
So I changed. And so in my case, I definitely value it a lot.
Yeah.
Being able to go into his office and mumble things and like, oh, is this your question? Yes, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's definitely something important. I mean, there are people that just don't care about that. I mean, and I mean, I don't know what the solution to that is. I mean, because I suspect physics will always be a field that attracts very obsessive, very types of people that can be very harsh sometimes. So I think I would say that I would advise people who are looking for advisors make sure you know yourself and what kind of is having advice that you like important to you. Because I mean, so actually something else that can happen is you have an advisor that you just don't care about at all, and so he doesn't motivate you, you don't motivate him. That's also kind of like a bland relationship. If you're going to do a PhD, I highly recommend getting someone you can, one, gets you excited, two, you get him excited, hopefully. I think that's definitely, at least for people like us, I guess, would be a very, very important thing. If you're not the kind of person that needs that, well, I guess good for you, I guess. But yeah, do know yourself, talk to people, and try to get advice from people who know the people around you, around the okay, actually now I'm assuming you're for your first year in a graduate program.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
If you're first year in a graduate program, I would say like talk to the rest of the students. People that you feel like you can trust and can give you good advice. Know yourself, what kind of professor you like. You probably like I would recommend someone that you like. But yeah.
I mean, it's really good advice. I think it's the most important thing in terms of your experience in graduate school. So we've kind of talked about our perceived issues with the field for a bit. Perhaps you could tell us, what is your perspective on like what is the biggest problem with the field currently? If there is any problems socially in general, or something in terms of like the structure, or maybe there's like some bad ideas in the field of like how professorship works, testing, education, the culture, anything like that. What do you think is the worst offender in terms of problems with the field?
The worst offender? I'm not sure which one's the worst offender.
Or offenders. I mean, you're not limited.
I guess I can start complaining about education, I guess.
Okay, let's start there.
It's always an easy one, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, to be honest, for example, so I'm an experimentalist, and I have realized that I don't need to solve in my research, I have not needed to solve any equations, and I have needed a lot of statistical thinking to be able to do my research, at least. Two things which I have in my, 4 or 5 years of undergrad of physics, and now 2 years of graduate school, have not received almost any statistical training, and I have received almost no physics problem solving without equations. Like, here's the problem. What do you think is, without using any equations? Like, tell me what are the physics that's going on? Those two things are things that I feel like I've needed, and I don't think I've received at all in my education. And so you're gonna force us to take so many classes, then I would hope that they're gonna help me for the most part. So yeah, actually I'm an experimentalist, and you guys two are theorists, so I don't know if that's a general experimentalist complaint. Maybe if you get more experimentalists, you can ask them. But yeah, and I would say education is also so focused on just solving physics problems that for some reason are important. Not always very clearly. They're not always clearly. It's not always clear why they're important, or what the important implications of them are. For example, like I can it's clear why solving the hydrogen atom problem is important, but what are all the consequences of solving that is like something none of my classes I've ever gone into much about. Like, okay, this is the result. Okay, these are all the great things that have come from it. This is why the hydrogen atom is so important, because it's the basis. Yeah, they say, oh, it's the basis for all these other things, but they never say what all these things are. That's always been a complaint I've had.
Yeah.
What else? Did you guys do research in your undergrad? I didn't do any research. My department just almost pushed you away from doing any research until the very, very end. I think that was maybe a problem in my department, but yeah, that's a complaint I would have.
Yeah.
Computer programming skills.
Yeah, for sure.
It's 100%. A 3 for 3. We needed programming, and it's becoming very important things like so.
Yeah.
And yet, I think in my department there was only one computer science class for scientists. I don't know about you guys. If you've had any.
No, I mean there weren't that. Well, there was a computer science department, but in physics there was no requirement to take any computer science classes or learn any programming, which I agree.
Physics or science, computer science for scientists.
No,
classes.
they didn't have something like that. No.
Yeah. I took a Mathematica class. I don't remember if it was required or not, but that was the only coding thing that they had in terms of physics. So.
I don't know if I would count Mathematica.
Yeah,
that much, because
yeah, it's not a very
it's a great language, but
yeah, so there's a lot hidden behind the scenes. Right?
Yeah, and it's not that useful when you want to do more.
Yeah, less
high level stuff, more low level stuff is not that good as far as I know.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating coding in like for loops, for example.
Yeah.
Like if you need to iterate over, if you need to do some calculation over and over and over, it's kind of frustrating to deal with that. And yeah, so I think condensed matter physicists use Mathematica a good bit. Yeah, but most others, Yeah,
I do C++.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then in terms of research, like I did do research for a while, like 2 years, in condensed matter experiment, because pretty much all the professors at Long Beach do research in condensed matter. There was one professor that did research in astrophysics, which I was interested in back then, and I basically just emailed all the professors saying like, "Can I work with you?" And so I ended up at condensed matter because we got a new professor. She needed students. But in terms of like whether they pushed me to do that, it was kind of just like this thing. They said, "Oh, you should do research if you're thinking about going to grad school." There's never really any like. It wasn't that important. They didn't place that much emphasis on it. They just said, "Oh, like kind of as a passing comment, like, oh, you should think about doing research." And so it was me being self-motivated that I ended up there. And so, what about you?
Same for me. I had that. I mean, there are people who did research, yes, but again, it's like more self-motivated. I feel like maybe they're doing better in terms of like trying to give out, expose the resources for the students. They didn't back then. They were just like you said. They would be like, "Oh, if you're thinking of going to grad school, maybe you should do some research," instead of kind of being more structured about it and giving us more of the resources and like kind of helping us one-on-one or not even if it's possible one-on-one. My school was small. It was an all-women's school, and there were only 8 physics majors in my year. So we could have each had easily individual advising to help us figure out the process of trying to find a research for the summer or for a few years.
And if you want to go to grad school, you kind of, it's almost necessary.
Yeah, but I mean, back then, they didn't really emphasize that or give me those details. I don't know about in your school, so they didn't discuss it. So it's not like I even realized that it was such an important element to get into grad school that I had to do undergraduate research for a good amount of time, right? And I feel like nowadays it's so competitive that you really do need to have that on top of it, on top of like perfect grades and whatever else you need. So.
Let's see. Another complaint I guess I would have would be like graduate school, at least the first year, or the first 2 years. So I'm in my second year, and did not take all the what's called the core courses, the first 6 courses that you usually have to take in a graduate school. So I've met most of the first years in 2017 and 2018, and it seems borderline, at least in this university, my university, borderline unhealthy the amount of work they ask you to do in the first year. And borderline unhealthy also means counterproductive to most of the students. I mean, there's always a handful of exceptions that are just so good that they can deal with all the work, or they can deal with all the stress or whatever. But for the most part, it seems very counterproductive, the level of work they're asking you to do in the first year. Not to mention that sometimes I question how useful.
Oh yeah.
Why there's so many mandatory courses. Coming back to my previous complaint. Okay, I take 6 core courses. The only thing that resembles statistics is statistical mechanics. But those who have taken statistical mechanics know it's not quite statistics in the statistics sense, in like the mathematical statistics kind of sense.
Yeah.
It's has the name, but it's very different. So yeah, they demand all these classes. Like sometimes the applicability, at least from my perspective, seems questionable sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's something I haven't reflected on too much lately, but I guess I agree in the fact that it feels like a little antiquated in terms of the classes we're taught. It's just like historically they might be important for physics, right? I mean, I guess you should know for most fields like dynamics and maybe, I don't know, I guess there's a lot of baggage, right? You're just taught a lot of these classes and they're not properly motivated, right? And so, I guess I would agree that if we streamline that process, I think people could, be a lot more fruitful in their careers and stuff like that.
Or at least well motivated. I mean, I think I guess that's also a criticism I would have, at least in my undergraduate experience. The lack of motivation for what you're doing is, one can deter from your understanding of the subject. 'Cause, I mean, oftentimes like a good motivating fact can give you perspective on and as to why you're doing this and why it's important. Like good motivation can be very important for you being motivated. Wait, am I repeating this? Good motivation can be important for motivating the students, and for allowing you to understand why things are the way they are. Like, because I mean, for example, like I think one of the reasons they insist on still keep teaching so much classical mechanics is because all the other theories are kind of based on those kinds of ideas. Even though, as far as I know, no textbook I guess there are textbooks that sometimes mention it. But one of the important reasons for classical mechanics is the fact that it builds in the easiest way what will be done either more generally or slightly differently in the future. But if that is not if you don't keep that in mind when you're doing classical mechanics, then you kind of, I don't want to say wasting your time, but you're not taking advantage of what you're doing. Because the purpose is more in the future than it is now. Because as far as I know, most research doesn't use classical mechanics really in almost any sense. I don't know.
I mean, I guess it's less clear than like mathematics in terms of
or quantum mechanics.
How these classes are foundational to one another. Like in what ways you need one to do the other. So that's interesting. Okay, if we could take a step back, I'd like to ask you a little more of a fun question, I guess, is a question that came up on Sahana's podcast that I'd like to pitch to you is we were talking about aliens.
Okay.
Right. And so we had a hypothetical alien walk through our front door, right? And you are allowed to ask it any question that you want in terms of like learning something about physics.
Okay.
If there's anything that you would ask this alien, what is your first instinct?
What's my first instinct? I don't know. If I could, So I'm assuming whatever I ask him, I learn like very well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask him to teach me QFT? Or is that too much?
No,
You can ask anything.
Yeah.
So they're, I mean,
Okay, no.
significantly more advanced than us, right? So they've figured out things.
Yeah, they can explain QFT in 2 minutes.
No. Maybe they could even beam information.
Actually, I guess one of my one of the questions they really did solve everything. I would want to know, why does quantum mechanics work? Because I mean, that seems to me like a question. Like, I mean, I've gone looking around YouTube, and you find very, very prominent physicists, theoretical physicists that are brilliant at what they do, and it seems to me they still don't have remotely. Seems to me that they really don't have any good reasoning for using why quantum mechanics works, other than why use quantum mechanics? Why quantum mechanics is true, other than it works, and a whole bunch of. I mean, I guess they have other arguments, but they're all just as weird as quantum mechanics. Like, they all use this. Like, I was reading something about QFT, and they started talking about infinite degrees of freedom to explain locality. It's like, what the heck does infinite degrees of freedom mean?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Yeah. I don't know if you could answer that point at all.
Because
I haven't. Because I haven't taken QFT, so I don't.
Yeah, to be fair, I haven't taken QFT either. Yeah, it doesn't seem to me like the quantum mechanics is all that well motivated. I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I agree with you, because Juan's podcast, the other Juan that was on the podcast, his episode is up now. He has the perspective that we do understand quantum mechanics. It's not a very popularly held belief, but when he was on the podcast, I think he did kind of agree with us in the sense that, like, we don't understand the physical underpinnings of quantum mechanics. So to me, that's not understanding it. So it's a mystery, right? As to like how to interpret this thing. There's just the mere fact that there's all these different interpretations to it signifies that we don't really understand it, right? Because it has the freedom to be all these different ways that are perhaps mutually exclusive. But yeah, so that's interesting. That's one definite prominent mystery in physics that would be good to know. I think that harkens back to your interest in philosophy a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes me curious. If I were to broaden the scope, you could ask it anything, the alien anything.
Anything.
Not related to physics then, because that seems like a very physics niche answer. So.
Yeah. Any question I could ask.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I want to ask, what's the thing that matters between people? Because, for example, if you start listening to economists, they're going to start talking about incentive structures, for example, or they might, if they're kind of like the Marxist kind of thing, they'll start talking about structures or stuff like that. If you start listening to, what are they called? Postmodernists, I think they're called. They often talk about like systems of oppression and stuff like that. And sometimes, like if you go to a bunch of different disciplines to talk, or like social science or like psychology, and they'll start giving you answers that they don't necessarily exclude each other, but oftentimes it's just not even clear how one has anything to do with the other.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess maybe one question would be what's the thing that matters between people? I guess I need a motive for them to coexist well. Okay.
So is it fair to rephrase that as, how do you live like a moral life in a society? Or
no, because the problem is, even morality has the issue that it doesn't know when to stop. Like, if you can perfectly say what is a moral person, then you're screwed.
Why? So
because I mean, for example, if as far as I can tell, if I were a completely moral person, I would have to go sacrifice my life for the people in. I hate to use the cliche example, but in Africa, who are starving, and I have a huge amount of knowledge that can help them. Yeah. Why don't I just go there and help them?
Yeah,
I have no moral good reason to do it, other than, and not to mention that morals, like, they have no predefined, like, how do you choose the morals?
Right. I mean, so I don't want to go down this rabbit hole specifically, but I think Irene and I have like a interesting stance on this. Well, at least I do personally. Is I wouldn't say I'm convinced, but I think it's an interesting argument that morals could be objective. I think there is a case to be made there, but that's a whole. That's going to take hours to unpack why I feel that way, right? Yeah. So, okay, but so you don't mean a moral life. So what is it that? Could you clarify a little bit more as to like what matters between people? Like, what do you mean matters? Matters in it.
What? Okay, so I guess the question is, I guess what I care about is that people can. I don't even want to say that they get along well, because I don't care if they don't care. I don't care if two people don't care about each other or even dislike each other, as long as they don't fight and cause other people problems, for example. So that's why it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious as to why is it that sometimes people that don't like each other can still coexist, but people who agree on almost everything can still start fighting about the most minuscule things.
Yeah.
So that's why I phrased it like that.
Okay, so perhaps
I guess it's coexistence. What's the thing that matters for there to be, I guess, peaceful coexistence? Okay. I guess it would be
right. Yeah.
Like curious.
Yeah. So that's where I was going. So like, the question, perhaps if I get another shot at rephrasing it, is in what way should society structure itself so that it can optimize peaceful cohabitation between spooky, ominous.
It's like never. That will never happen. No, I'm kidding.
You're asking the wrong question.
It's the aliens answering you.
What was your phrasing again?
Does that sound fair?
How do we have to structure ourselves to?
Yeah. How should society structure itself such that human beings can live peacefully amongst each other?
I'm not sure you can phrase it like that, because I don't like the word structure.
Okay.
Because
right.
The problem usually with places. So usually when you have a structure, I can't imagine a structure being capable of accepting all the possible configurations, I guess, of coexistence, if that makes sense. Okay. Peaceful coexistence, because that's the one I care about.
So you're saying like once you're defining something?
Once you put a structure, it seems to me that either, I suspect that always you will at some point start having people fight because of the structure. Structures incentivize things, right? And these incentivize things. But you always, I suspect that you always randomly, you can always get someone that doesn't fit into any part of the structure, right? So that's why I don't know if the structure is the right idea to use.
Principle.
I mean, it could be dynamic, though.
Right, exactly. Maybe structure just implies to you that it's a little more rigid in how it's defined.
Maybe, but principles also have issues, right? Because principles can start clashing with each other.
Yeah. Well, so then,
which is often a problem in morality, right?
Yeah.
It starts fighting with itself.
Yeah, but so I'm not. So then I'm not sure the word. Then you're gonna have to.
We're gonna have to ask the alien what the word for this would be.
There's a reason why it's such a strange wording. I don't even know what the right question is.
Yeah. Okay.
That's why I want an advisor that I can just start mumbling. So I hope your alien is as nice as my advisor. And if I start mumbling to him, he'll figure out what my question is and then answer it.
Yeah. Okay, you're gonna have to get back to me on if you could figure out the wording that's optimal for your question.
I'll try to get a wording that makes sense.
Okay, and then I didn't pitch this question to you last time.
Yeah, I did. I answered it. The theory of everything, remember?
Right, that was for physics. Is the answer the same if you could ask it anything and just anything in general?
Oh, I think so, because I think if I learn the mathematical structure of that, I feel like it could be, the pattern there could be moved to a lot of different areas in life, including like social dynamics and psychological dynamics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like if they explain that to me in detail, I would have like this understanding that I don't have now, that I could then put a lot of pieces together that may even help answer your question.
Maybe.
But I don't know. So I probably would stick with that question.
Okay.
If I think of anything else, I'll let you know next podcast.
Okay. I'll let you pitch that to us in the future. Okay. Yeah, there was. Well, there's a couple things. So I guess this is the most related thing, so maybe it's redundant to ask it, but what do you think is the most important problem for physicists to try to solve now? Like, what is the like, in terms of like academia, in terms of like problems that we're tackling, what is the biggest problem?
I'd say it's just research problems.
Yeah.
Huh.
What do you think is going to be, if you were a betting man, I guess, what would be the most impactful?
If I were a betting man, I would expect maybe fission. If we could get fission and resolve energy problem, maybe. In terms of physics, sometimes physics suddenly helps medicine in strange ways, but I would, in the usual thinking of physics, I would say probably fission would be my bet as to what would be the most impactful in terms of humanity, I guess.
Yeah.
Hopefully. You never know.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good answer. How do you feel about our thesis for the podcast? What do you think is the relevance of diversity in science or physics specifically? Do you think it's important? Do you think it's worthwhile to try to be as diverse and as inclusive as possible?
I mean, definitely to be as inclusive as possible is definitely a good thing. Because if you're not, then you're artificially excluding people that could be very valuable to you. If you want to be a utilitarian about it, I guess. I mean, some people would say it's just inherently the right way of doing things to include everybody. There's no reason to exclude people. As to why is diversity important, I find some people to think that I get the feeling that some people think that diversity is important because although solve the same exact problem in a different way, I think some of that will happen. But my feeling is that diversity is important not because of the things you can predict that will happen, but the things you can't predict will happen. I think my feeling is that if diversity really is as important as we think it is, as I think it is, I think I would put in my mind the reason is that you will bring in people that because they have very different life experience, you can hopefully train them to understand your what the consensus physics in our case paradigm is. But because he has this very different background, he can either use it in a completely different way, a way that we wouldn't have, nobody in the community would have thought of, or for example, maybe go to a place where nobody would have thought to teach it, or see that physics can be applied. I don't really I got distracted earlier. I should mention that. I did promise a second example as to from earlier, but I've been distracted. So I apologize. But I don't know. All the examples I can think of is maybe like engineering problems, where if a physicist went to solve it, it's not that we're better than engineers, but okay, let's put this. Typically physicists aren't thought of people that can care that much about their communities, to be honest. They're thought of people that are very smart and very intellectual and can are capable of very abstract thinking. So perhaps this person that is brought up in a very different culture where community is what's important more than perhaps self-progression or progressing yourself or self-improvement.
Yeah. Okay.
And all of a sudden you get this person, you get them up to speed at what you're good at, and somebody says, wait, if I take this and bring it back to my community, if I take this and I show it to the community will elevate them. So they'll have new tools, new knowledge, knowledge to improve themselves, which perhaps was, I would say, not really a thing that's considered that much in physics. I'm sure there's people, but they're isolated people. Yeah. So I would say that if minorities matter, I think is because they would use the exact same knowledge for new things.
Yeah.
I think that's the nicest way of putting it.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I agree with that completely. And I think that in doing that, like you said, if you're more community-based, let's say, culture, you grew up in that culture and you have, you feel like you want to go back and progress your community in some way, you're bringing back this knowledge to them. Now you're creating a larger pool of people who have this skill and this knowledge that can further develop anything we need to develop, right, in physics and help society grow as a whole, right?
I came up with another example.
Yes, go.
Because I remember when I went to a conference at Google, and one of the persons that talked was of Mexican descent, and she talked about how she studied physics, but she ended up in Google and used what she learned from her culture, which was storytelling, to apply it to her job. Feynman is very well known for his lectures. You could imagine that if you suddenly brought in a big group of people from a culture that values like storytelling a lot, they could develop a new way of talking physics in the sense that or teaching it in a new way, perhaps hopefully one that the community would say it's even better than the one they have. In which case, they would, bringing in this new community, improve the community and the physics community. Because I want to use this example because the previous ones have been physics helped these people to help other people. But I mean, physics can help if minorities bring in their cultural input. They could change physics in a way that improves physics.
Yeah.
In this example.
Yeah. So I mean, I think an interesting analogy is something I heard on Radiolab again. Is they did a special on Einstein recently, and Einstein's brain, and they were trying to determine if his biology, the way his brain was structured, was the sole cause of his genius and stuff like that. And they kind of also explored the fact that his environment had a lot to do with perhaps his discovery too, because back in the 1900s, they were just developing the train systems, right? And so at that time, they had to really rethink how we were doing time, because suddenly you could get from one part of the country to another part of the country in a very quick amount of time. And so you have to determine, well, what's the right time, right? Is the time in this location the right time, or is the time in this location the right time? Because they're not going to match. And just the point is that that fact alone, that him being in that environment caused him to think about how time relates, or relativity, right? How time relates between these two different locations. And I think something very similar could be said of people of minority backgrounds, of people who come from diverse places and diverse ways of growing up. Because I think it's very much the case that the way we understand higher cognitive functions is by analogy, right? I think it's only like, we only really understand these complex phenomena in relation to other complex phenomena that we have had some experience with, right? And it's like this foundational effect of like, okay, you can analogize it to this experience that you've had. And I think all these different ways of growing up and having these different experiences, my prediction would be that you would have much different ways of looking at the world, and as such, much different ways of thinking about the universe and, you know, how everything works together, you know, like relativity, or like, say, you know, you grow up in some specific community and you see something in the world, like from a story or from, you know, whatever's going on around you, that people who all have the same experience of background would never consider, would never have the opportunity to even experience. Anyway, so it's just something to consider that I thought was pretty interesting. Okay. Anything to add to that, I guess? No?
I mean, I think I noticed that I was going back to this issue with it when you said structure earlier,
Yeah.
I kind of like said no. I was like, I'm kind of inherently, I don't like rigid structures, so that's partly why I would always expect minorities to improve something in a way that the structure wouldn't know how to change.
Yeah.
Which is why, I guess.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, as physicists, we kind of value solving things from first principles, right?
Yeah.
And so inherent in structures are a lot of biases and things that we haven't really considered, that if you really think about them from the first principles kind of way, you could feel comfortable in doing away with a lot of the structure that's already in place. So minorities having a different experience can bring light to those biases, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm becoming mindful of your time. How are you feeling, Gabe?
I'm good. What time is it? We can keep going if you want.
Okay. Well, I just have a few more, like, maybe lightning round questions. Sure. So I always like to ask the guests, because this has been a personal experience of mine, is if you had a friend that was to come up to you and say that they think they're interested in physics and that they're thinking about pursuing it, like going to go study it for the first time, what advice would you give them to perhaps not repeat all the mistakes that you made, or like, kind of preempt that learning?
Let's see. I would say, well, it depends on the person. I think, okay, I'm going to say maybe advice I would give myself, perhaps. Yeah. So I would say don't focus on classes too much. Okay. So let me make that more clear. Make sure you do well in your classes and you understand what you're doing. Or, okay, I should say, don't take too many classes. Make sure like, in this case, quality is better than quantity. I think I would say almost certainly. I would say that if you want to go to graduate school, you got to make your path, in the sense that you have to figure out what you want to do, figure out the tools you want to get, you need to do that. But when you get to grad school, it's not like you're going to be by yourself, but you need to consider, you need to be self-independent, self-sufficient and independent. Mm-hmm. That is an important thing, which is often not very much talked about, even in undergraduate university, at the undergraduate level.
Yeah.
So definitely develop self-independence. Don't expect your professors to tell you everything you need to know, because they might tell you maybe they'll tell you for the exam, but they won't tell you for everything else. It's a lot of trial and error. Work hard, I guess. That has to be said, I guess. Look outside the classes. Essentially take it into your own hands, I would say. And if you can get good friends, they'll help you a lot.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, very nice. Is there any negative experience that you've had in your life that you feel has changed you for the better?
Negative?
Negative experience in the fact that you wouldn't want to repeat it again.
That would make me better? I don't know. I don't think I've had really big-ish things like that that I wouldn't want to.
So to give you context, is this thing I was talking about, experiencing imposter syndrome, is is an example that I might give personally. Is coming into this graduate institution and then doing pretty poorly, and then I wouldn't want to go through that again. I wouldn't want to do bad again, but I think it's brought a lot of perspective into my life in terms of, I guess, kind of humbling myself and kind of getting a bigger picture of what I do and don't know and things of the nature. Is there any experience similar to that, or perhaps comparable, that you feel you've had?
Trying to think. I mean, because I would say that I would change most of the classes I took in my first year of graduate school. But I don't know that having gone through all that made me better. To be completely honest.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would change them mostly because I think they were kind of the wrong way of going around things. Yeah. So the part that I'm struggling with is finding something bad enough that I couldn't redo, but that was helpful to me. Because for the most part, I don't take issue with bad things. I mean, I deal with them and keep going on for the most part.
Okay. Any specific regrets then, I guess?
Regrets.
Yeah. So let's restrict it to college and up.
No, okay. I do. So a lot for a couple of years in undergrad, I knew that I needed to go back to pre-calculus and basic mathematics, and that I would realize every once in a while by myself that I'm taking too many classes. This is being counterproductive. I'm not learning my classes. If any regrets, I would say that not having the it's not self-motivation, it's a self-discipline maybe, or
awareness.
Not even awareness, because that's the problem. I was aware of it. I was aware of the goddamn problem. Yeah. It's not having the decisiveness. I guess it's decisiveness the problem. Not having the decisiveness to act on problems that I was smart enough to see in front of me, and I just didn't have the strength or fortitude, I guess, to deal with them. Because sometimes I even knew the answer. It wasn't that hard to figure out, and I still kept making the same mistake.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. And then one thing I'm realizing I was neglecting here in our conversation is your experience with field hockey, right? So it sounded like that was a pretty important part in terms of your undergrad experience and stuff like that. So how important do you feel field hockey is to your life?
I think it's very important. I've played it for 17 years now. I started in 2002. I never stopped. Sometimes I played more than other times, but I never stopped. I also played with the national team. Started training with them in 2009. I stopped training with them, I think, 2015 or 16. Probably when I'm done with classes, I'm going to call up the coach and it's hey, I'm going to start running and training. if you need an extra player, I'm in.
Yeah.
So it's definitely important. It's been very frustrating, but for other issues like just like the way things were and like the culture in that group. I love the sport, but there were a lot of conflicts between people that made the environment kind of toxic, and I didn't really appreciate it as much as I could have because of that.
Yeah.
It made undergrad more difficult than it had to be too.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would think like maybe I should just stop field hockey to be able to focus on my classes or something, but nah. I think it was good that I didn't stop. I never stopped. I made some friends that I've met people there that I would have never met otherwise in terms of like life experiences.
Yeah.
Like one of the people in my old team used to be in jail. One of my old teammates used to his what's it called? His not cousin, uncle, I think it was. Was a big shot gangster essentially. And he sometimes would tell me stories about the kind of things he was doing when a little kid, and like, God damn, dude, that's not okay.
Yeah.
He had changed more afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely good for me.
Okay. Yeah. And so, how do you feel graduate school has affected that relationship with field hockey?
So, I think it's not some okay. Well, actually, it would have changed. It would have changed it a lot had I been in a place where a serious hockey team was. The hockey team in the university is fairly casual. Sometimes we have people that start playing for the first time in their lives when they get there. So in that sense, it's okay. Actually, yeah, because I would be training more and trying to go with the team to tournaments. I guess in that sense, it has prevented me from doing that. But actually, because the team here is more casual, I don't have to. I don't care about any of the gossip, and I just enjoy my time. I just enjoy myself. So it's actually been very like an outlet to relax and get away from physics.
Yeah,
it's definitely been good for my mental health.
Okay, yeah, great. How difficult did you find it to balance that in terms of finding time to do field hockey and graduate school?
Oh, in graduate school, not so much. I mean, we practice twice a week for 2 hours. And sometimes, so essentially because it's so casual, whenever I couldn't finish my homework or had to study for a test, I would just tell them, I'm sorry guys, I'm just not going. In undergrad, it was more difficult because in that case, I was being more serious about it. And I sometimes left for a week or two in the middle of the semester. Before that, I was training 3 nights a week, plus some weekends, plus whatever I did by myself. Yeah. So that time it was harder to balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Irene, do you have any questions on this vein?
When are you coming to field hockey?
Oh yeah. I found my field hockey stick at home, so I
really?
I'm probably the same height as I was when I played, so probably could still play. Not very well, but yeah, I'll consider it.
Shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll just kind of invite you to reflect with us as to the importance of having this outlet to you is in graduate school. How do you think you would fare without it? How important do you think it is for people in graduate school to find something like this to try to support their mental health?
It's definitely very good for me. I think, I don't know how it would affect me, but I don't, definitely not, it would affect me in a very negative way. Because sometimes I did force myself to go to stop studying or doing homework or working to go practice because I needed to do something else. And the fact that it was kind of like scheduled there, I could use that as like a benchmark. Like, no, wait, I feel hockey and I really need to stop working because it's not. So it's definitely good, and I definitely think it's a very important, at least in programs which have very high workloads in their first year or whatever year. I mean, like, you have to, working too hard is not good for you. And the worst part about it is that working too hard can be counterproductive. And sometimes, it still happens to me that sometimes I work 10 hours a day. And when I think about it, sometimes I realize, I'm there 10 hours a day, but I get tired at some point, and like I slip in and like start talking to somebody, and then I start maybe watching some YouTube or get on Facebook, or I'm there for 10 hours, but how much of that 10 hours did I really work?
Mm-hmm.
And repeating that process of working 10-hour days, for example, just makes these times where you're wasting these 10 hours, like chunks of these 10 hours just get bigger when you're wasting your time. Not to mention that you wake up more tired the next day, and so you're even less productive when you're being productive. And it's like, it's hard, but you really have to be mindful of that, and having a hobby that sometimes like set aside sometimes, like no matter what you go, like that is helpful. And some semesters I've like said that, or parts of the semester I just say that, like, I need to do something other than physics. I'm going no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Screw homework, screw whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm that's something that I have to become ever mindful of more and more. It's really difficult to find that work-life balance, right? Especially in graduate school. I often catch myself slipping in terms of working too hard, and then, so it's something that I've struggled with a lot and tried to find that balance, but I'm working at it, just like everyone else. I wish I had a consistent hobby that, I could say something similar. I have a lot of interests, such as this podcast, I guess, that is becoming that hobby. So that's good. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that is part of the culture that I think we need to work to change in terms of graduate school in general, probably, is the workload is kind of unrealistic, I think, in that aspect. And, maybe that goes back to cutting out some of these classes that we don't need, because it's like, for how much we're working, it still takes a hell of a long time to get your doctorate degree, right? So I think maybe if you just trim some of the fat in terms of like this shit that no one cares about, or is really not productive in terms of the quality of your research and stuff like that. I think that could be really beneficial to seeing the overall quality of work just increasing, just because people have more time to be human,
Yeah.
Irene, any thoughts?
No, I agree with you. Just as a curiosity, how many productive hours would you say you have a day or a week, whatever is easier for you to report?
I don't know. I think it varies by what I'm doing. I feel like sometimes if I'm doing something I've done before, I know I'll be very productive, because I find that I have I don't know if I have more difficult. Okay, I feel like I have more difficult than other people. Maybe that's not right. But I feel like I have a very hard time learning something new in an efficient way, I guess. So when I'm doing something I already know, for the most part, I feel like I do it at a good pace. Mm-hmm. Versus when I do something for the very first time, I often feel like I don't. I feel like sometimes I start staring at the screen for 10 minutes, looking at the same paragraph maybe, or something like that. So I feel like in the process of learning, I'm not very flexible as to realizing, I'm stuck. I should change what I'm doing, or go like I have to resolve this in a different way. Maybe talk to someone else about it or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. But I would say that when I'm doing something I know, I'm fairly productive. When I'm doing something I don't know, And I mean, sometimes it varies a little bit, but usually I'm not that productive, I don't say. And then I start like talking to people around me, or maybe if I had a very strong week or a strong day the day before, maybe the next day I started getting a little more more lenient with myself as to how much work I need to do. So yeah.
So you would say that overall, do you feel like you're average productive or below average productivity in a week on average, or above?
I certainly feel below average.
Okay.
But I'm probably actually average.
Yeah. I know I feel like I'm like really below average. Like not very productive at all. That's how I feel personally. But I just wonder, because I am interested to know like how people perceive themselves in terms of productivity versus how they perceive other people's productivity.
I would expect myself to think of less than what I do. Like, I think I tend to be a bit pessimistic in terms of how productive I'm being or something like that.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say of most people, right? I'd say that's the same in my case, and I'd be surprised to find someone who claimed the opposite. I'd almost be tempted to call them a liar. But yeah, so I think that's a common experience, right?
Yeah.
Which probably has something to do with so many people having imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
It's like, when everybody has imposter syndrome, it can't be that everybody's an imposter.
Right, exactly. That's the one assurance you have, because the statistics are crazy on that. Yeah. But okay, I think I'm running out of questions. Does now seem like a fair time to wrap up? So is there anything that you'd like to shout out? Any family members? Any projects you're working on? Any charities, etc.? Anything you want to toss out into the ether?
I don't know. I usually don't like shouting out people's names or things.
Okay.
I will thank you for this. I think it's a great project that you got going on.
Yeah, thank you.
You and Irene. So good luck.
Thank you.
The best.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We'll need it, but but yeah, it's been great having you on, and hopefully we can chat again sometime.
Sure.
Yeah. Don't forget to like us on Facebook.
Yeah, self-plug.
Self-plug, everyone. Okay.
All right.
Thank you again for coming on here.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.